Today we have a special guest who really understands change, and we're talking about how to lead through change and deal with resistance to change with some real lessons and real talk on how to break through from someone who's actually been there. And that person is Suzanne Knight. And Suzanne Knight is the CEO and founder of mBolden Consulting Firm, which is a human capital consulting firm. And she's also an award-winning expert and keynote speaker on transformational change and the future of work. And that is such a hot topic for everyone. It applies to everyone, is relevant to everyone. With her company, mBolden, she works with clients around the world, helping them anticipate and adapt to change so that they could thrive rather than just survive. Very catchy. Thrive and not just survive. And through her own firm and nearly a decade at Deloitte, Suzanne has worked with over 40 clients in 12 countries. And beyond her consulting work, Suzanne is super active in angel investing with the Firehood, a startup advisor and a tech founder. And she also spent 5 years with Walmart Canada as a vice president, transformational service with 100,000 plus employee portfolio, and Philip Morris International, leading organization transformation and change for Canada. So her specialty, you can see she really knows very well how to lead transformation, how to deal with change in organizations and teams. And she also volunteers as a sick kids innovator, a mentor with Urban Squash Toronto, and is on the HR committee of JIAS. Yeah. She served as the head of diversity, equity, and inclusion for a consumer goods company, as the executive advisory council for Walmart Canada's Women in Retail program, and on the foundation board of the Canadian Art Collection. A lot of different things there. Plus, she's an MA in industrial organizational psychology, MBA in finance and strategy, a bit of everything. And in 2023, she was recognized on the Peak Emerging Under Age 40 Leaders List and the DMZ's Woman of the Year. So welcome. So happy to have you here, Suzanne.
Oh, Ivna, thank you so much. And thank you for the kind introduction. Glad to be here.
So change is such an important topic. Change in the workplace, change in our teams, change with our customers, change in our personal lives, like we were just talking about right before we started recording here.
Yes.
It's such a difficult thing to do because of people's emotions. So what do people experience emotionally when it comes to change that makes it so hard sometimes?
When people are going through change, the emotions can be all over the place. And I'll actually start with a story. I was working on a consulting engagement and it was overseas. There were a number of different personalities in the room, and I was facilitating at the executive level. This involved not only multiple personalities, but a number of different companies. And the topic was contentious. It was a post-merger integration, and not all of those executives who were in the room would still be in the company 3 months from that point. I was presenting on what the future would look like and getting feedback on it from the group. And somebody said, "This is not my future. This is not what I'm going to do." And they stood up and walked out. I share this example because work is life and life is work. It's so hard to detangle the two from each other. And so when you are looking to manage change, you have to put the human in the room, those human elements, and think with empathy about what they're going through. Because if they're worried about their job, their role, or their ability to add value, even what the work side is going to do to their personal life and ability to support their families, those emotions are going to come out.
Interesting. So several concerns about their role, their future in the company, but also their ability to add value. I didn't expect that being a concern that people had. What are some of the other elements of resistance that you've encountered, that you've seen from people when it comes to change?
I'll tell you another one. This is a Canadian example. I was working with a public sector organization, and it was to implement new technology and manage the resulting change. And a number of people within that organization were resisting aggressively. And this system was going to automate a lot of the work they were doing, not to eliminate their roles, but actually, honestly, there was not going to be job loss, but it was very much going to change their routines and the way that they did their work. and talking to people one-on-one. And this is a tactic I'd very much recommend, taking people out of that group setting to understand at the individual level what keeps them up at night, what the resistance is, where it's coming from, and what they can do about it. I've members of that group had been in the organization for years and they were really good at their jobs. And putting in a new technology meant that they were going to have to do things differently, learn new things, and maybe they weren't going to be good at it. That at least was what they were stressed about. And so coming in with the change management, it came to the point of willingness and ability. Those are two major factors that have to balance out for people to be supportive. Willingness is about your heart and wanting to do the change to get to the other side. Ability is whether you have the capacity, the capability, the funding, whether you just know what buttons to push, or you have the instructions in front of you, or you have a phone a friend. So when managing change, getting both of those pieces together is critical. And in that first example, that executive example, it was an issue of willingness. The leader was perfectly able to get to the future, but they didn't see themselves reflected in that future, and that caused an emotional reaction. In the second example, it was ability, and that ability then affected willingness. In either change, there was resistance, and it was up to the change team and the colleagues in the room, the other leaders in the space, to be able to put their arms around the person and say, hey, the change is coming. Let's figure out together how to make it the best change for the organization and for you as an individual. Let's figure it out.
So willingness to be part of that change and to accept the change, and ability. So those are two main elements that you're talking about. And then let's say the change leaders come in and talk to people one-on-one and understand what the source of resistance is. What else can they do to overcome specifically willingness and ability in those situations? And if do you have an example of that?
Sure. One way is to go through a visioning exercise. And so, to tell you what this looks like, it could be a change facilitator or a leader standing in front of the room and having a group of people in the space. And it starts with asking those people, what's changing? Let's actually work through for you and for the organization what will be different, and mapping that out on the board and talking through for each individual that art of the possible with what their day is going to look like, what their major milestones and the moments that matter will be like, so that they really understand those key differences. And then the next step is to talk about why we're changing. So, to talk about the benefits of that change and what we hope to get on the other side. The last piece is what's in it for me, as in the individual in that room, maybe the leaders they report to, maybe the organization, but to talk about ultimately what the business case is at that human level that could actually motivate them to go through the change. Once you have that understanding and you have alignment and clarity on the vision, then you're basically able to go through to say, in which areas are you feeling stressed, feeling resistance? And let's talk about why. Or on the ability side, is it the timeline? Is it the funding? Is it a capability that you feel like we can work to develop together? Is it something else that we can tangibly use a lever to get you to the other side on? And then that can help you build a change plan and chip away at those areas of resistance one by one.
That's a lot of conversations. The visioning exercise, then the conversations around the why and the benefits, then what's in it for them, and sell them
Yeah.
on why it's important for them, and then helping them figure out the ability part. What are your suggestions when it comes to getting people involved, maybe at the beginning of change process, where you're still trying to figure out what are the problems with the organization and people are resisting to share that information because they know change is coming as a result of it, and they don't want to facilitate that change. So they're not volunteering information that's important for the change makers to actually plan out what that change is going to look like. So what are some of the things that the change leaders can do in that case to get people to open up and share some of the troubles, the challenges
Well,
beforehand?
It's such a great question. Some of the ways that organizations can get the answers around what the pain points are, like what really makes it hard doing their job. I worked with a leader in a previous company, and he used to say it felt like his hands were coming out of the freezer. Imagine just not wearing your gloves outside or having your hands in the freezer and like they're frozen, frostbitten, and you're trying to use your hands then to write or to grab or to hold. And everything is so much harder with your hands being frozen. That's what he felt like it was every day to work in this organization with the bureaucracy, the processes, the hierarchy. It was really hard for him. And he ended up leaving for a great new role. The thing is that employees, people who are on the front lines or doing the actual work in head office, wherever it is, they know the pain points intimately because that's what keeps them frustrated in the hallways or at the water cooler or just takes them so much extra time at their desk and it feels like their hands are in the freezer. So it's best to ask them and be open because that's the way that if you say you're going to solve those problems, and authentically dedicate time, energy, and resources to solving their pain points, they'll be more likely to get on board. But I would also say, in my experience, it's great to bring in an outside expert so that people feel a level of confidence and anonymity in sharing those pain points because some of those pain points can be tied to a specific department or a specific leader's decisions. And it's not about putting that leader or department on the spot, but it's about actually leaning into those impediments because they are the path to success. If you lean into the issue and solve for them, you're so much better on the other side. But just making sure that people are open about telling you what is hard about their work is the most important piece. So if you feel like you have the psychological safety and comfort and confidence from the team, then absolutely do it yourself, do it inside. It can be survey, it can be focus group, it can be one-on-ones, it can be casual, it can be formal. It's really about the org culture. But if you think there's any risk that you're either not going to have full transparency from the people you're asking, or you think that the facilitation would actually benefit from people who have gone through a lead transformation before, then go outside.
Wonderful. So going outside, finding someone else like consultant, that's why a lot of companies bring in consultants is to facilitate change often because of what you're just saying, as well as being at that point in time when you're trying to collect information, clarifying, being very clear as to how your intention and how you're going to serve them or help them solve that problem. I really like those tips. And when the change is defined and you're trying to change the environment or the team or whatever, how else can you bring stakeholders on board with that change?
I was leading a massive transformation in a previous company, and this was national. It affected tens of thousands of employees, and it would impact so many elements of the business as part of this massive comprehensive strategy that it was actually really hard for people to understand the change. It was so broad and some elements were very technical. So something I did that was really helpful with getting people to understand is I simplified it. I took it down to the four core elements that we're going to change and built videos in partnership with the communications team that would tell the story of change for each of those elements. And those videos were shared in multiple forums and actually made available for people to watch on their own. Each one was less than 2 minutes, so they were bite-sized. But just to be able to see a visual representation of the change in a low-pressure way helped. And something we did then was paired that with reading, with speaking notes, so that at any of the events, the executives would talk about the change and reinforce the key messages. Anytime we had successes, we shared those, especially those quick wins at the beginning that could help build trust that the change was real, it was coming, and it was a good thing. Every one of those elements, particularly combined together, help to reinforce this very complex change.
It's a process. And I've actually seen quite a few leaders, and not with respect to change, but film little videos every week
Yes.
for their massive teams if they had hundreds or thousands of people, because there's a distance there and things get complicated very quickly. So I love that tip and really simplifying it and working with the resources in the company, which is comms and others to share that and help the leaders communicate and create consistency around it and share the wins as well. I can see that definitely opening people up to change.
It's great. And I'll actually pick up on something you said. So those leader videos, they're such a great tactic because leaders are often, not often, but sometimes they're a little bit more concerned about speaking off the cuff and sharing their in the moment reflections. Video gives that safer path for the people who aren't comfortable speaking about the change or don't necessarily understand every element or are worried about answering questions with something pre-recorded that they can share, particularly if it's frequent. There's no substitute to a leader standing in front of a crowd and speaking live with heart and passion about the change. But something that is pretty good is that pre-recorded video.
Yeah, because you can really hone in with the messaging and they can prepare and make sure that all of the videos are consistent with each other, even if there are multiple leaders involved. Absolutely. And you've worked in a lot of international, so even the first example you shared was an international
Yes.
change. And I'm sure that could be very different from culture to culture. So what have you experienced and what have you learned conducting these cross-cultural change initiatives or in different countries, different continents?
It's so interesting. One of the big changes that I've noticed country to country is whether the approach is top down or bottom up to change, and that level of command and control on it. There was this massive change in Mexico, and it was an agile transformation focused on new ways of thinking and new ways of working. And the CEO was a massive proponent of this new way of working, absolutely passionate about making it successful. And this individual, over a period of 3 years, actually was successful. Every element that he wanted to change changed. The organization design, the ways of thinking, the ways of working, the technology that was used. And they got the results. Customers were happier, revenue was up, costs were down, they were faster getting to market. What I'll say though is at least 30% of that workforce was exited and replaced. So the organization did not get substantially smaller, but anyone who was not on board with the change was exited. Now, that's a very specific way to manage change. And I'm actually going to speak here without judgment because that change was successful. A different approach is to go bottom up and to try to change those hearts and minds of every individual and hold their hand and guide them along a path. And in different parts of the world, actually, a number of Canadian companies tend to be more gentle with the change. The benefit is you can put employees at that center of your heart, your journey. Employees are the core. The challenge is that sometimes you lose momentum. Sometimes it's easier to resist in the hopes that the company will actually get tired of trying to make the change happen. And so those resistors get what they want. It's like a leader just continuing to bang their head against the wall and say, why aren't they changing? Why aren't they changing? And offering more cookies or more handholds or little nuggets, saying maybe this is the one that will create the change. And it doesn't necessarily happen. But when you do go bottom up and you authentically create that change and are successful, then you have far more buy-in than if people are changing based on fear. So those are some of the cultural differences, and some of them are geographic and larger societal differences. Other ones are just company culture level. Company culture, I would say, outweighs geographic or societal culture in a lot of these change initiatives because you could have a CEO from anywhere in the world working in any other country with the expat population and movement. And same thing with the leadership teams. I don't think there's one way that one country operates, but I thought it's interesting to share those examples.
Have you seen more successes in the top down where the CEO is super on board, or the bottom up, where maybe the CEO and the C-suite is not that involved and not that bought in to, they believe in the vision, but they're not super involved and excited about it.
You actually need that CEO and leadership team to be zealots, to be absolutely bought in, no matter which way you go. Because particularly if you're trying to go bottom up without the support of that executive team, with absolute certainty, the initiative will die. It will never be successful without the resilience of that leadership team continuing to push it forward when it feels like you're going 2 steps forward, 1 step back. In some ways, it's easier to force the change through top down and go big bang pulling off the band-aid, but then you get to that question around buy-in and authentic change to hearts and minds, and whether people are maybe operating in a new way, but in their hearts, hoping you'll go backwards, or going through the motions and not giving all of themselves to it. And maybe you can lose great people because they were wonderful at their jobs. They would have been great in the future state, but they didn't like the pace of the change or the way the change was happening. And if it had gone a little bit slower and a little more gently, maybe they would have stayed to the other side and been phenomenal into the future. But the common thread is if the leadership team is not absolutely bought in, it will not be successful. So as a change leader, number one mission is to get that executive team clear on the vision, what's changing, why are we changing, and what's in it for me, and to give them the speaking notes and to have them walk the talk on making that change successful. And then the next step is to figure out how hard they're going to push and in which ways they're going to push.
So essentially, it comes down to two approaches. One is top down, the other one is top down plus bottom up, because they still have to be at least supportive and really buy into the vision. And you said the first step is really to get the executive team on board. Have you ever encountered resistance there? Because it's not just one person, right?
Yes.
And what were some of the things that you were able to do to really get people to accept that change and really push for it and be committed to it?
It's so hard when people are focusing in on self-interest and what the change will mean for them to the point that they block out what the change will mean for the organization. Amazing people have opportunity. I firmly believe in opportunity mindset, that there are roles, there is abundance, there is the opportunity for prosperity. And these people in organizations, these executive team members, as they're going through, can fixate on their role they're in today and forget about how when change happens, it can open so many doors for them, whether it is within their market in a different function, whether it is in their market, in the role they're in, but doing incredible work in new ways. Maybe it's in a different market, maybe it's in a different company, but there is abundance of opportunity. So when I look at changes that have failed, that have absolutely failed, it's been when leaders were so worried about their position or whether they would be missing out on their next promotion or whether they would be losing headcount or having to dedicate budget to other things, that they just couldn't see the forest through the trees. And there are absolutely tactics that can be applied, but unless you have momentum and leadership from that leadership team, whether it's from the CEO as a tiebreaker or members of the executive to hold the hand of the resistors and pull them forward and help them understand the benefits that are waiting for them if they buy in. It's really hard on the outside, whether it's as a consultant or leader of a transformation team, to override the fear of an individual. It's all about the supportive network.
Yeah, and I can see how everyone at the end of the day is thinking about them and their situation and their job and their promotion and their resources at any level of the organization. So it becomes definitely a challenge to get people to think about, like you said, that there's ample opportunities that can come with change. I imagine KPIs are important when you're
Yes.
convincing the executive team to adopt a certain change approach or project transformation. So what are some of the the tips around KPIs, or what are some KPIs are more helpful for that?
Yes. The tip is have KPIs, measure something. So this can be an amazing exercise that can help people actually get more bought in. It could be to have the leadership team at an offsite and to say, what does that future look like? Go through change vision, but also go into corporate strategy. What is the company trying to achieve at what timelines? And there should ideally be metrics around that corporate strategy. Ideally, not all companies have these, but you hope that they have KPIs. And then how do you translate those into how the change can help? So let's say that the company is looking to have a certain level of employee engagement over the next 1 to 3 years. Change is hard. Change can actually hurt engagement in the short term, but in the long term, if you get people's hands out of the freezer, you can substantially improve how people feel about work and also how they feel about their company, seeing them and their value and saying, actually, we want work to be better, faster, easier, more enjoyable for our people. And that's when you see engagement skyrocket. So you can put targets around that. And same with customers. Most companies would have a customer experience target, and having transformation focus on the customer at the core. One example is I was working with a consumer goods company, and this company wanted to transform their entire organization design to center around the customer. How, from their strategy to their action plans and operations to their design to which roles they staffed and how the roles were described, could they focus on customer at the core of everything they were doing? I led this transformation, and it was incredible what resulted, not only for the customer, but also for employees and their financials. This company skyrocketed through the change. And I believe it was because not only were they making good decisions and making the company better, but people started to work in lockstep and be aligned around that common vision. So when they had a disagreement or a question around where funding should be allocated or whether something should be approved, it became very obvious what the right answer was because they had that crystal clear vision that they were all working toward. And that helped engagement and it helped them get more done because they were moving faster. It's just another example of how leadership and clarity at that level, particularly when it can be cascaded to every level of the organization, is incredibly powerful.
That example that you shared reminded me of an old case at Johnson and Johnson with I forgot the name of the medication, but that was at some point started killing people. And because they had such a strong vision through their credo, they were able to align everyone and make this very fast, quick decisions at the executive level, know exactly what to do to deal with the crisis
Yeah.
and move on and improve their KPIs and outcomes pretty quickly. Because when you say short term, might hurt the KPIs, and long term, it'll be beneficial. Sometimes that long term is not that long term.
Yes, you're absolutely right. And if I could share one more story, I was working with an organizer that was trying to transform to be customer centric. And they had KPIs focused on sustainability, on green energy. They also were trying to put in place KPIs and ways of working around customer service and customer experience. And sometimes these commitments or these priorities would be in conflict. Working with the executive team, we talked through an experience of a moment that mattered. And I'll also clarify this was an airport that I was working with at the time. As a business traveler, early in the morning, you're exhausted, you're groggy, you don't want to be leaving your family or home, but you get into your taxi, you get to the airport, it's maybe 5:30, you have your carry-on, you're hauling it around, maybe you haven't had your coffee yet, and you check in, you go through security, and you are walking to your gate. You get to one of the electronic sidewalks and it's turned off. And the terminal is dark, the lights are really low. And you think, this is the last thing I need today. I'm so tired. And now I have to walk and haul my bag another kilometer down the way. What is going on? What was going on is the airport had turned off their electronic sidewalks and lowered the lights because they had sustainability targets. Meanwhile, they were sacrificing customer experience. So, this is where at that executive table, they had to sit down and work through a really hard moment that mattered to say, there is actually a right decision. They just have to decide what for them is that right decision. Is it in a lower traffic period to accommodate fewer customers and make those customers happier, but hurt their sustainability targets? Or is it to say it doesn't matter how many customers are coming through, customer is king or queen, customer is the priority, and sustainability has to come second? There's no right answer to us, but for that leadership team, they had to figure out for them what that priority would be. And companies have to go through that process because imagine if you are the operations manager and it's your decision to figure out what to do about the electronic sidewalk. Think of how much time it would take and how many layers of approvals they would have to go through to make that decision if it's not clear from the top which side of the coin is more important. It comes from the top. And then once you figure it out, those decisions become really fast and really easy and much more consistent.
And that's key, right? When it comes to change and transformation, is having that agility in decision making and creating a process, a system that enables people to make quick decisions and not be scared of potential negative consequences if they make the wrong decision, because it's
Yeah.
so clear what the vision is. And that example is so common, right? Where you have the resources or the spending, or in that case, sustainability versus how much you do give to the customer, right? The customer
Yeah.
satisfaction.
That's it. Well, there is an example. I was working years ago as a consultant for a transit agency, and this agency was actually wonderful for customer experience. We don't necessarily think of our public entities as centering the customer, but this one absolutely had the customer right at the core. And they had an initiative where on Customer Appreciation Day, they gave out muffins and they gave muffins to every customer as they were walking through the station. And there was massive backlash from the press saying, where's respect for taxpayers or giving these muffins out to the customer? At the same time, the media would also slam this agency every time there was a customer service issue or a delay. In some cases, it's really hard to figure out which ways you can impact the change and which ways you can satisfy all your stakeholders. And for that customer, what would have actually made them happier? Was it muffin or would it have been some kind of compensation in the cases of a delay? There are ways to figure it out, but one way that we haven't actually talked about, but goes back to that agile view, is small pilots and tests. And this is an incredible way to manage change. You start small, you nail it, and then you scale it. So start with that pilot to see what is the offering that would disrupt the customer experience in a positive way? Is it a muffin? Is it a rebate? Is it the lights being brighter? There's so many variables that you can play with, but figuring that out, making it work in one station, and then once you've done that, scale it out broadly with proof that it was the right approach can help actually gain buy-in and make sure you're not spending money where it doesn't have to be spent, but where
Yeah,
it
it
will
all
create
the
that.
biggest impact. Yeah, it all ties in, right, with the buy-in, with the decision making, with being able to get all stakeholders on board, and in finding that right vision and balance for all of the. And speaking of balance,
Yes.
it's hard to keep everyone happy, the people that are in the front line or stakeholders in general, while at the same time trying to drive results and those
Yes.
KPIs. So how do you balance that?
One way is take things off people's plates. Once you have absolute clarity at the top, no more than 5 to 10 major priorities over an entire year, then you can allocate people toward those priorities and let them know that nothing else they're doing needs to get done. Nothing else matters. So it's not additive. It's not saying, oh, we understand that you have 10 projects and we're adding 5 more. It's about saying if those 10 projects do not directly align with one of these top 5 or top 9 priorities, take it off your plate. It's not a priority for this year. We're not funding it, and you should not spend your time working on it. That's an incredible way to give people clarity and confidence in leadership to know what not to do because it will not create the impact for the leadership or the company. And also, they can have better balance themselves, knowing that their time is well spent.
I love it. So when at the top, people are very clear on the priorities and that cascades down and reduces people's stress level. But if not, then it also cascades down and becomes stressful. And in your experience, leading change, leading transformation, one of the fears that people have on the podcast is, oh my gosh, are people going to hate me because I'm bringing this change? I'm making their lives miserable. Have you experienced that?
I've definitely experienced it. And actually, it is so much harder trying to create change from the inside. I didn't know if it would be or not. I spent a decade in consulting earlier in my career, and I worked on over 40 client engagements around the world. I then moved to industry and spent 5 years leading transformation from the inside. It was so much harder leading transformation from the inside because people took what you were saying personally and they could leverage those concerns to make your work so much harder. When you're a consultant, you have a pre-negotiated statement of work with a scope, with timelines, with budget, and it's already gone through the approvals to get you in the door. So in many cases, it's not that there's not change to continue to manage, but the big rocks are set. When you're in the inside, it takes one executive to say that they don't like what you're doing, or it'll change their job in a way they don't like, and they're going to torpedo the change and make it really hard for you to operate within that space. So I'll say, yeah, it's very tough. And it's not about having a thick skin. It's about being effective. And sometimes you just cannot be as effective from the inside, particularly without that C suite being very much bought in and sure they want that change to be successful.
Ah, so this ties into what you mentioned earlier, which is
Yes.
if you don't have the support from all the executives, then it's better to get someone from the outside and coordinate with them to drive the change.
That's it. And sometimes the inside and the outside would have the same message. They would have the same advice, but leaders might have to hear it from different people, particularly those who have gone through it multiple times, who don't have a vested interest in one way or the other, as much as making that change successful. And that can come from the outside. Even if on the inside you authentically want the change to be successful, you are stuck with so many personal dynamics and politics that makes doing your job 10 times harder.
That's definitely the case. And then flipping the coin to the other side of the whole change transformation, which is
Yes.
team members, frontline people, everyday people who are just trying to do their jobs, who are maybe scared.
Yes.
What can they do to embrace change and navigate through it in the best possible way?
For those people who are looking to navigate change in the best possible way, they can continue to do a couple of things. One is try to understand the change and figure out what they agree with and what they're excited with and what they think is not going to work. And understand that there are areas of resistance. You can have constructive resistance where you are looking for this initiative to be successful, but you are honestly, authentically finding things that should be better about the change, the approach, the levers that are being pulled. And then there's destructive resistance. This is where you are trying to torpedo a change because you do not want it to happen, whether it's for a personal reason or otherwise. But it's not about being constructive and trying to make the change happen in the best way. It's about not wanting it to happen. So reflect on yourself. It is wonderful to have constructive resistance and to have someone care enough to share with their colleagues and their leadership team how the change can be made better and more impactful. It's a gift. So do not hesitate from sharing that resistance. If it's destructive resistance, then self-reflect to say, is this related to my willingness or my ability? And is there something, if it's related to ability, for example, that you can invest in to upskill or to spend a little more time getting to understand some of the technical elements or what the future is going to look like? Maybe invite someone for a coffee and have them walk you through it. If it's about willingness, then again, reflect, is this going to make your work harder in some way? Is it going to take you away from your family as you navigate the change? Some of that can actually fall under constructive resistance side. It's up to you to determine and then figure out what your solution is. So that's specific to the change. For that person or for those people, I would also say the future of work is coming. The future of work is here. Technology is playing bigger roles in how companies operate. Many of those automatic rote tasks that people used to do have already been automated or outsourced, but the knowledge roles are also being enhanced or in some cases replaced today. Please keep looking at what opportunities there are to upskill with areas that are going to be particularly important in the future of work that can't be replaced by machines. One of them is interpersonal skills. It's an area where being able to collaborate, to share ideas, to be part of a team and to work together toward greater goals is an incredibly valuable skill set. So don't underestimate some of those soft skills that will be core to the future of work and continue to build your expertise. And if it's relevant to your role and your interest, build those technical skills as well. There are great free courses or courses that might be covered by your company that you can take to focus on AI in metaverse in any topic that you would find interesting. Even simple tools that you can figure out how to use that will supplement and enhance the work that you're doing today or in the future.
Wonderful. This podcast is about interpersonal skills, so that's definitely something that's
Yes.
aligned, and it definitely helps to do what you were talking about. Being able to have constructive resistance is about talking about things with people, talking about it in a way that actually adds value and is solution focused. Suzanne, this has been amazing. Where can people find you?
Please feel free to follow me or connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm Suzanne Knight. You can find my website, mBolden.co, no E, MBOLDEN.co. And the tech company that I have co-founded is beuninterrupted.com. And it is for professional women to support them in uninterrupting their careers.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for all these tips on how to create, embrace, and support change in organization, in your teams. Really wonderful tips. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. It was an absolute pleasure.